everyone, welcome into Bolt Breakdowns. I wish I was here under happier circumstances, but the Chargers lose 27-24 to the Tennessee Titans um, in what is a disappointing game, disappointing finish that sends them to 0-2 now on the season. There's no sugarcoating it. This was a failure kind of at all levels, and I know I came out hard on the last podcast talking about Staley and his defensive game. But to me, I had a lot of people asking me on Twitter because every time the Chargers lose, it's kind of who do you want to blame this game on? Is it Herbert's fault? Is it Staley's fault? Is it Moore's fault? And honestly, man, it's everyone today. There are certain individual players where I would go, it's not their fault. Of course, I think Thule had a great game. I think Bosa had a great game. There are Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, I think both played really well, right? I can go through the list and tell you the players that played well. But it's the discipline, man. Like the dumb penalties that this team keeps taking, keeping alive drives alive, from other teams on them defensively, as we saw with that Sebastian Joseph Day, Derwin James sequence, and then the lack of execution in their own offense today, where it's just like, the final drive or, of the game, Justin Herbert, is about to snap the ball and the offense is completely out of sorts, which is partially Herbert's fault, partially Moore's fault, the offensive line fault, coaching. No one was set, right? And there were a lot of moments today like that on the offense where it just felt very out of sync. I didn't feel like it was the strongest game for Moore, honestly, even though the Chargers, didn't technically put up like a bad point total. But the scheme today was just kind of like, okay, get Kelly some first and second down runs. Then they started attacking in the middle of the field and it worked. And then like it just kind of dissociated from there. They never again really gained any momentum at any point in this game. It just felt like kind of stagnated drives after touchdown drives. There was never a real flow to this offense. And so that's kind of my takeaway today on the offensive side of the ball. But I want to, I guess, before we get into anything specific, talk about communication because that is what's lacking at this team right now. And I don't know, you can debate blaming that on Staley, blaming that on Moore, blaming that on whoever else you want to, the individual players themselves, whose job, again, it is to execute. But man, like the secondary looks completely lost. Like I don't know what we're doing in terms of that situation where Staley starts this game by benching Michael Davis, then bringing him back in, then benching JC Jackson for two drives and not using him, bringing them both back in and still giving up big plays to Chris Moore, giving up big plays to Treylon Burks. And a lot of comments last week were like, oh, well, look, Mike McDaniel just played a great game. You got to tip your cap. And the thing that I kept saying is like, yes, it's Mike McDaniel, but it was also the Chargers getting in their own way consistently, right? And just not having the right coverage assignments. ASJ gets blown by. Michael Davis gets blown by. And on both instances, there's no safety back there to help. Like on both plays, it's just tragic for the Chargers. And it's such, the Chargers when they're up 11-0, and that Treylon Burks ASJ moment happens. It's so deflating to get that offensive drive and finally have things headed in the right direction. Feels like, okay, here's where the Chargers really assert themselves, and the secondary just blows it. And I honestly thought the defensive line played a pretty good game today. I know they kind of got ran over by Derrick Henry and Ty J like later in that game, but honestly, I think they held them to 140 yards on 34 carries, which is not bad efficiency. They got at Tannehill a bunch. Joey Bosa picks up 2 sacks. Thule had a great game, like I mentioned before. But it's just the communication as a whole that is happening in the secondary, in particular in this game. Like, it just felt like nobody knew what they were doing. And I don't know how it really gets better from here. Let's start with the defensive side of the ball, where you're going to be going up against Justin Jefferson next week, right? Like there is no break for this team. And what Tyreek Hill did in week 1 feels very replicatable to what Justin Jefferson can do in week 3. And if we don't have our mind made up on who we're playing, whether it's Michael Davis, whether it's J.C. Jackson, whether it's Asante Samuel Jr., and Ja Taylor, like yes, they're going to rotate their corners, but you cannot just have guys like not playing for large swaths of the game and then bring them back in and then then sometimes play single coverage on Justin Jefferson. Not guys not knowing like who their assignments are supposed to be. And like I think that partially falls on Staley and his scheme, like clearly not getting through to these secondary players, and it's also on the secondary players, of course, for not executing. Like ASJ had a bad game today. Michael Davis, honestly did not have the best game either, to the point where I can really like be angry that Staley benched him at the beginning of the game, even though I thought that was a weird decision. And J.C. Jackson kind of got cooked again too. So like I have my hands up at this point because I think everyone went into this game like, okay, they get their little rebound game from the Tua Tyreek show, and it felt just, I mean, not just as bad. Like, of course, the defense was better on the whole today, but it's the discommunication in the secondary that's really killing them. And it's going to kill them when you play Justin Jefferson. It's going to kill you when you play the Chiefs. It's going to kill you when you play the Cowboys and all of the teams that they have coming up on their schedule. So that's my main takeaway on the defensive side of the ball. I thought some individual players had some good games, but I think Staley's defense has a lot of questions to answer in terms of who are your actual personnel that you trust, like when the game's on the line. Shout out to Kenneth Murray today. I think he played pretty well on the whole. Certainly better than a lot of people thought he would, better than I thought he would play. But we can keep naming individual players, but again, it's the fact that they somehow managed, again, to not allow like an explosive game to a receiver or one player to really kill them, but it's just these momentary lapses that Ryan Tannehill is able to uncork a ball to Burks, uncork a ball to Moore. So were they consistent from play to play? At times, yeah, but it's just like those moments are so deflating and backbreaking for them, and it really feels like they again have no answer after they happen. So, um, I don't know the solution on defense in terms of like, you know, I don't think this was a terrible game from Staley, but it's again a lot of the same issues we're seeing. Derwin James, I know people are gonna like complain about the refs and complain about that penalty, but it's just like you gotta be more disciplined. You cannot be, kind of. I know he wasn't technically leading with the helmet, but put the refs in a position where they can make that call, because in the modern NFL, they're going to make that call 24 times out of 24. Sebastian Joseph Day, what are you doing on the late hit, man? Like, I know people will say that that's a borderline call too. He was there 5 Mississippis after Tannehill already threw the ball away. And it's just like that drive ends up killing them, right? Where they should have been able to get off the field on third down twice. And they don't get off the field. And ultimately, Tennessee has a pretty good day on third down. I think they went 6 for 13 in this one, if I'm reading the box score correctly. So I don't know. Again, from a defensive standpoint, it's not as bad as I'm feeling last week, but there's not a whole lot of good to feel about either outside of a few individual performances, because it just doesn't feel like this team plays like a disciplined unit. And until they do, they're going to continue to get killed by teams, A, that have matchup breakers like Justin Jefferson and Tyreek Hill and those teams, and they're going to get killed by well-coached teams too, who just like, convert the easy stuff on offense, right? Like the Titans today, who didn't do anything like super dynamic or revolutionary of the wheel on offense, but again, like they're just getting killed by easy stuff, and just running the offense as it usually is. And so they didn't really give the Titans too many things to think about today, really, after that first half. And so that's kind of the unfortunate part of this game, when the overall dysfunction of the defense overrides some of the good days that Bosa and Tully and Murray and some of these guys had. So That's all I got to say on the defensive ball. Let's go to the offensive side of the ball, I guess. Where I didn't, like I said earlier, I did not think it was the best day for Kellen Moore. The Chargers, the stat that I'm going to read to you is disgusting. Please prepare to cover your ears. The Chargers went 2 for 14 on third down. Just can't happen. And I know, some people will be like, well, they went 3 for 3 on fourth, like whatever. But like, man, their third downs just looked brutal today, just in terms of the design. I mean, Herbert obviously got sacked on some of them. Some of that is on the offensive line, but some of that's also on the play design and Justin Herbert himself, because Herbert cannot be standing there to just like take the sack. And if you're Kellen Moore, you got to draw out some plays where Herbert can like confidently roll out to his left, roll out to his right, make a throw. This is what Kansas City does. This is what every team does, right? In terms of just getting their quarterback, mismatches, not even mismatches, but just like easy options for him to get out of the pocket. And I think, again, I think that falls on Herbert for a lot of this game where he just stood and like took the sacks. But at the same time, it's also on Kellen Moore for like, I don't know, just like leaving Herbert in the pocket and not having some designed RPOs, play action roll legs, rollouts, bootlegs, whatever, to kind of manufacture some easy, offense where Herbert can potentially wind up and throw that big bomb down the field, or Herbert can just potentially, instead of taking the sack, roll out and pick up, 5 yards, with his legs, right? And again, we saw some of those things against Miami, right? Where, it just felt like Herbert was willing to leave the pocket and he wasn't a statue back there. I don't know what was with the passing offense today from that aspect. I think it falls on Herbert. I think that falls on Moore. It falls on everybody. And so when you're just taking third down sack after third down sack, those are killers that like you can't get those plays, get those moments back. And so really unfortunate what the Chargers did on third down in this game. And to go 2 for 14 and still have a chance at winning is like the crazy part, because most of the teams that go 2 for 14 get blown out, which is kind of a stat that it indicates, the Titans offensively, they never ran away with this game when they maybe had some chances to. And it indicates how efficient the Chargers offense was at times when Herbert was just finding that mismatch to Keenan Allen, finding Mike Williams, right? And just going through his progressions like normal when the offensive line was holding up. But when it wasn't, I think that that's both Kellen Moore and Herbert's fault for not really like trying to get out of something different. I know Herbert checked out to a run, which was a 3rd and 4 run for Joshua Kelly, which was just like, what are we doing? And again, it just speaks to the dysfunction of the offense of Herbert checking out of plays, the offense not knowing like what's going to be run. And again, it's hard when you're on the road, but Tennessee is not like a particularly loud. This isn't going to Arrowhead, right? You should still be able to run your offense pretty confidently when you have the chance. And for the Chargers to just like be so dysfunctional when they, don't have Eckler and like some of these like guys for one game, it's just like, I don't know, like, man, you had everybody today. Like you had Herbert, you had Keenan, you had Mike, you had a drive to go down and win it at the end of the game. And they get in their own way by taking that sack when they should have won the game in overtime, or won the game in regulation before going to overtime, right? And then to go 3 and out when you win the coin toss, like winning the coin toss is such an advantage in the modern NFL that like I can think of maybe a handful of examples, more than a handful, but like really most of the teams that get the ball win the game in overtime. I mean, especially in the old days when the rule was you have to score 3 and then the game's over, but like even nowadays, like getting it is such a big advantage. And to go 3 and out immediately because the offense doesn't know what it's doing and Herbert is kind of paralyzed back there, and Moore like just felt like he was dysfunctional today too. It just felt like he never quite had the right read for the right situation. There were individual drives where I thought he was really solid, but again, the consistency, right? The drive where he went up 21-17, I thought was actually a really solid one where he was consistently attacking the middle of the field with guys like Everett, guys like Keenan, right? And so that drive felt really good, but it felt really deflating when like the next couple of drives, it's like, all right, we're going to give the ball to Joshua Kelly on first and second down again, even though this Tennessee defense has told us, like, yeah, you guys aren't going to run the ball. You're going to have to pass the ball on, Murphy Bunting and Avery and McCreary and all those guys. And the Chargers, really until overtime, were consistently cooking those guys, which makes, some of Moore's decisions in this game, like, really not understandable. Like, why are we running the ball with Joshua Kelly when we can take advantage of their guys, downfield? Like, I didn't really understand that. I didn't really understand, like, the cutesy stuff too. Like, what are we doing with the end arounds to Mike Williams? Like, I know that was earlier in the game, but it's like, why is that not a Quentin Johnston play? Like, why is it just so much like trying to like be cutesy with these Kelly runs and like let's get a Mike Williams end around in here? It's like you have the guys to do the thing, right? In terms of your receivers downfield, in terms of potentially using Quentin Johnson, who like was in the first quarter of this game and then kind of like disappeared after he, I guess, didn't catch the touchdown at the end of, was it the end of the half? Got kind of held up on the play, honestly, but it was kind of a borderline call. But yeah, I don't know. It just feels like from a personnel standpoint, they do not have, an identity of what we wanted to do. And we talked about that so much with Joe Lombardi last year. And with Joe Lombardi, it was, some of the same things that we're talking about now, where it just feels like the direction and dysfunction on offense. Again, I don't think it's nearly as bad as Lombardi, but I'm just talking about those moments where it just feels like, again, everything's discombobulated and not running smoothly. And the Titans, to their credit, to Vrabel's credit, did some things to stop the Chargers in that sense. But at the same time, if you're the Chargers, you just have to execute better. Like, you cannot, be having these positions where you put yourself in a position to take a third down sack all the time. Herbert has to be smarter. Moore has to be smarter. I mean, guys have to get more open downfield consistently. And Moore has to scheme up ways to do that too. So that kind of falls on him. And I think guys weren't getting open down the field, but like for whatever reason, like they just weren't. Hey, roll out to your left, roll out to your right, Justin Herbert. Like, I just thought things could have been a lot more simple today, and they weren't. And it's kind of just really sad to think about this game as a whole, and to think about the Miami game, where again they have these two very winnable football games, and you falling to 0-2. Again, I don't want to say it's a death sentence in the NFL. We've seen Chargers teams come back from 0-2. We've seen NFL teams come back from 0-2. But it's like, man, like you cannot let these early games slide, right? And so, 0-2 can quickly slide to 0-4 if you're not careful against the Vikings next week, who are also 0-2 and are going to be dying to get that game too, just as desperate as the Chargers are. You start to fall into 0-3, and then, okay, it's the Raiders and the Cowboys and the Chiefs back to back. Not that I think the Raiders are this world killer team, but again, divisional game, if you fall to 0-3, and then Cowboys and Chiefs, that can spell the end of the Staley tenure right there, right? Like, things snowball so fast in the NFL when you don't take your chances and take advantage of the moments in those first two games, because there's an alternate world where the Chargers are just, I'm not even saying playing perfect football, but just playing cleaner football in the secondary, playing cleaner football offensively, where, drive to drive, they're just more consistent, and they're 2-0. Again, we I don't want to like complain about that too much, because the difference between 0-2 and 2-0 can be so slim, as we to some extent saw with like the Vikings and their two games and the Chargers and their two games, and other teams in the league. But it sucks because this team, in theory, is more talented than they are, right? And we talk about Derwin James and Joey Bosa and Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, and it's just like, I don't know how it always comes together like this, to the point where they're always giving another team a chance in overtime when they could have shut it down themselves. They had multiple opportunities to shut that game down, and didn't, where they could have gone up 28-17. Yeah, like, or sorry, not 28-17, but they could have won 28-24. They were up 21-17 at one point. Yeah, they were up 21-17 at one point, and just couldn't bury the Titans. It's just like, and again, like I said, the Titans didn't do anything like offensively terribly sexy the whole day. And Ryan Tannehill, just took advantage of when the Chargers were dysfunctional the whole game. But I don't know. I want to say you leave this off on a big positive and go, okay, the individual guys, like I said, game balls, with all due respect to Dooley and Bosa and Keenan and Mike. I thought some guys on the offensive line played pretty well today. Slater outside of his holding penalty. There are guys who played pretty good games. Darius Davis had a good day on special teams. Dicker, keep going on throughout the whole team. Kenneth Murray, like I mentioned, but it just feels like, again, like this is a coaching thing from top on down, and this is a player execution thing too. I'm not just gonna throw Staley under the bus. I could throw Staley under the bus a million times, like I probably already have on this YouTube channel, but it ain't just him, and that is the sad part of today. It is team-wide execution failure, dumb penalties, can't get off the field on third down. Can't have it when it matters on offense. And those are just the things that are going to separate you from being a team like the Chiefs and being a team like the Chargers, sadly. And so I don't know. I don't have a ton to add. I am recording this right after the game, if you didn't notice, because I have an exam tomorrow. So I hope that goes better than this game did. But I am recording this after for that reason, because I want to have a chance to record tomorrow morning. But I wish I could be a source of more optimism, and I'm sure as I'm recording this right now, actually, Steven and Tyler are probably in the middle of a very fun podcast. But yeah, tough way to lose this one. I wish I could say I have more optimism in them to turn it around. The Vikings are beatable, but so were the Titans, and so were the Dolphins. And it's the execution on this team that is going to be the death of Staley, and at some point, going to be the death of me in 17 weeks. I'll leave it off on that positive note. Anyway, bolt up and beat the Vikings next week,